Welcome back. It is exactly 8:42 a.m. News and Views on Salam Media, and we're now going to be talking about a crisis unfolding just across the border in Eswatini, and we have Congo's solidarity voices raging over the Eswatini crisis, and I think it's not only Congo. I think it's all over Africa. The Congo Solidarity Voices have put out this statement suggesting that one man cannot cripple a nation. They go on to say that we stand shoulder to shoulder with the oppressed people of Eswatini, as we in South Africa refer to it as Swaziland, until the Eswatini people are freed. This barbarism must end. We stand in unwavering solidarity with the people of Eswatini, formerly Swaziland. Your pain and suffering resonate during the kleptocratic regime of Mobutu Sese Seko in Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And I think that resonates with us as well here in South Africa under the rule, the horrific rule of the dark days of apartheid. So let's talk about what exactly is playing out in Eswatini. We are going to be talking with a young lady. Let's get her picture up on screen. Let's get on screen so that I can see her name clearly. It is Qhawekazi Khumalo. She is the convener of Swazi Lives Matter. A very good morning to you. Welcome. And please forgive me if I pronounce your name incorrectly, but lovely having you on air.
Thank you so much. Yes, no, I understand the click can be very difficult, but it is Qhawekazi Khumalo. And thank you for the opportunity. And also want to pass the message to thank our brothers and sisters from Congo for that solidarity statement that they've issued.
Okay. How dire is, in fact, the situation playing out in Eswatini? I mean, off air, I say to you that in our dark days of apartheid, Swaziland, as we referred to it back in the day, and Mozambique was a safe haven for us to visit and get a sense of freedom and not feel the yoke of apartheid around our necks. I also know that back in the dark days of apartheid, these were the safe havens where mixed couples used to go to for a bit of relief and know that they're away from prying eyes. I mean, that is how bad it was back in the day in South Africa. But thankfully, 30 years on, and those dark days of apartheid are over. But it's very, very sad to note that something similar, not exactly the same, but something similar is playing out in Eswatini. Just how dire is the situation?
The situation is extremely dire. I think from the political front, for instance, and I'm happy that you are making a correlation with the apartheid regime in South Africa, because the methods and the tactics of the current absolute monarch in Swaziland are exactly the same. For instance, in Swaziland right now, if you are a political activist or if you are an activist or a human rights defender, you are targeted by the state to an extent where you are surveilled, to an extent that you are apprehended, to an extent where at this current moment, as I speak to you, we have young people who are in jail because they have a dissenting voice against the current monarchy. And so also one of the laws in which the regime currently uses is labeling any form of activism as a terrorist act. And you will understand that, the regime actually does apply and execute this law. We currently have 2 MPs and some of the young people who are currently jailed under this barbaric law that we must call an end to, as it was in the apartheid regime. So the situation is quite dire in terms of, political activism. The civic space is totally closed in Swaziland. Swaziland, we are still struggling, to have peaceful protests inside the country, because the system does not allow for us to be able to have those protests. And yes, the propaganda and the manipulation by the current regime is that these kind of things do happen. However, when you do follow the legal process to have a protest, you are denied those rights. We also know that in Swaziland currently, political parties are burned. So there is no participation of ideas outside the royal supremacy. The only ideas that are allowed in the country, and anything different is looked upon, significantly with a lot of brutality. Police brutality is quite high in the country at the moment. We have young people again affected by this kind of police brutality. Not so long ago, we also saw, the junior officers who are calling for a phase 2 salary increment in the country being brutalized by the police because they are not allowed to exercise such rights. So the situation is really quite dire in the country. Economically as well, I think one of the reasons why we're calling for an end to absolute monarchy in the country is that the socio-economic conditions that we're living under are unattainable. We have one of the highest unemployment rates, in the continent, and particularly globally. We're sitting at about 40% unemployment, and the most affected is the young people, who are around 60% unemployment rate in the country. And you can imagine what such conditions manifest in, and that means young people are wasting away. In particular, there's no jobs. Poverty is abject in the country. You can see it from corner to corner in Swaziland. And the contradiction there is that Swaziland does have the resources.
Okay, your
However, mainly for the king and the royal family, they live in luxury on a day-to-day basis. His birthday is coming up on the 25th of April, and I want us to just watch how much money is going to be spent. The current fiscal is 1/3 of the current fiscal of the country goes to the royal family. And so we know and understand that for the past 52 years, the system has never worked. It is an illegal system in which the king, Sobhuza II at the time, made a unilateral decision so that he's able to amass state power and economic power for the benefit of the royal family. And I think that as Africans in particular, we have a duty to ensure that we say no to oppression, and we must end absolute monarchy in Swaziland.
Okay, I'd like you to take us back to 1973 and explain to us how all of this played out. That also begs the question that there undoubtedly is a lot of strong support for the royal family in Eswatini by foreign powers. How do you see that? What's your sense as to who are the powers that are propping him up at the cost of the people of Swaziland? You've indicated that millions of people, very especially young people, are enduring unimaginable poverty, hunger, unemployment, sickness, illiteracy. So what's their future going to be like? Are you going to have a future generation of Swazi youth if education is not happening and not being offered to these young people, and also a crumbling infrastructure? So your sense of who are these foreign powers enabling this to continue? What do you believe should and must happen immediately to dismantle this royal family in power?
All right, just to start, maybe give a brief background on the 1973 decree. So we'll understand that Swaziland gained independence in 1968. And part of that process towards independence was that, there must be a fair representation of different ideas. And so in 1968, at the Independence Constitution, allowed participation of, liberal politics, if you'd like, where political parties were actually allowed to be part of the political sector in the country. 5 years later, this is when King Sobhuza realized that, with such participation, it means that, he will not be able to amass the country's wealth for the benefit of the royal family. And so the 1973 came in where absolute power was given to the king. So that's how and where 1973 comes in. And obviously, with the 1973 decree, it means that as we currently speak, the king is above the law. Everything belongs to the king, something that he said himself, including the people of Swaziland. And so we must understand what the impact of the 1973 decree is overall in the country to the current date. And I think that, who's propping the current regime up is certainly African leaders. African leaders have not been true to the principles in which we believe they need to stand for. South Africa is one very concerning country in terms of the Swazi struggle. We know the values and principles in which South Africa, from its own historic experience, stands for, and that is the respect of human rights, the dignity of every human being. And yet we are not seeing how South Africa's role is playing out in terms of those principles, in particular with Swaziland, because it continues to be business as usual. And so we do believe that South Africa is propping Swaziland up because it is not calling for accountability in Swaziland. There are various evidence, situations and instances in which we believe South Africa could raise its voice. It cannot be business as usual. And so again, African leaders in particular, we know that Swaziland was removed from the SADC, agenda, I think 2024, because the king had the platform to say all is well in the country, there's peace, which is also very untrue. However, our point of departure is that the system in itself cannot belong to Africa. The absolute monarch regime cannot belong to Africa. And so we believe that amongst the different elements within the country that are not going correctly, we must be able to change the system first. And that African leaders, as I indicated earlier, have the responsibility to uphold the principles of human rights in the continent. So we do think that in the main, African leaders are propping up the regime. Of course, we know that there are economic transactions, business transactions, including corrupt transactions that are filtering in terms of how these African leaders are not standing up for the people of Swaziland. So that is the main concern and challenge that we think is contributing to propping up the king. And the people of Swaziland are certainly not asking anyone to fight their struggle for them, but they are asking Africans and African leaders not to work against them. And at this point, we do realize that they are working against the people of Swaziland in their fight on this struggle. What we think needs to happen in terms of immediate steps of dismantling this regime, I think there are demands that have been on the table, demands from the Swazis themselves, and part of those demands is a national dialogue. We do need to make a reflection, a national reflection, not only on the current situation in the country, but what the future of the country is. And that is not a sole responsibility of the regime. And so it needs all Swazis. And so what we are continuously calling for is that national dialogue. Part of that, the demands is also the political prisoners need to be released. Because we know that they are not criminals, they are activists. So as part of immediate steps that need to be taken is the release of political prisoners. We know that Thulani Maseko, a very prominent lawyer, was assassinated in 2023. We to date have no sense of any investigation, independent investigation. And so as part of the process in which we believe dismantling the current regime is those demands. And we are really, as Swazi Lives Matter and the campaign that we have started, Justice for Swaziland campaign, is to say that the two parties in the country must be able to come around the table because we do want to see unity amongst Swazis. And I don't think that there is support of this regime in Swaziland. I think that is maybe incorrect regime. Of course, the regime rules with fear, just like, the old slavery days, that if you dare, speak against us. So there's a lot of fear in the country, with a lot of, how the regime is able to manage, the Swazis who are trying to speak against, the current regime. And so we're also calling for the opening up of the civic space, for the opening up of the political space, which is also going to help us in the transitioning of dismantling the current system, which is the absolute monarch. So we believe those are some of, the immediate steps that can be taken. And certainly one fundamental immediate steps is if countries like South Africa can really start outlining their position with regards to the Swaziland situation and crisis, outlining their position with practical steps around the fact that such a system has no place in any society. And I think Swazis do deserve the support in particular of South Africa, and this is not an obligation that we're asking for. However, we do know that South Africa did have a solace in the Swazis themselves, who were able to, be there for South African and South African activists. And so we're calling for all South Africans, a people-to-people solidarity as well, where pressure is put to the South African government by the South African people to say, we note, and it is really well, we all support the struggle of Palestine, for instance. However, right at our doorstep, we've had this situation for over a long time now, 2021, where a lot of Swazis were butchered by the regime, where unarmed civilians were killed by this regime. To date, we have no accountability for the lives that we've lost at the time of the 2021 unrest. But nothing has been done to the extent that it gives practical understanding of South Africa's position, and also that will help in terms of putting pressure to the regime to start the process and be part of the conversation of saying that this regime needs to end, and very soon it needs to end. And so that is our call, and I think that those are the immediate steps in terms of what the Swazis are calling for.
Thank you indeed. We need to wrap up. Thank you for your very deep insights with deep emotion regarding the situation in Eswatini. Undoubtedly, there is a huge groundswell of support, and I'm sure sooner rather than later, we're going to be seeing a change in Eswatini. Thank you for your insights. God bless.
Thank you so much for having us, and we do appreciate the space.
It is exactly 9 o'clock. News and Views moving along. And just a reminder that this hour of News and Views is brought to you by African Muslims Agency. And don't forget, also a little later on in the show, we'll be taking a listen to the Fired Up series by Hafiz Imran Chunara, the CEO of Africa Muslims Agency.